which will be happening statewide, but there will be a vigil on the campus of the University of Iowa. Would a killer stay close by? Would a killer show up to an event like that? And how do police and investigators prepare for that possibility?
I think in this situation, it is very likely and certainly possible that this killer would go to this vigil. I think this killer is a part of the community. They could be on break and staying their distance, but I believe they're part of this community and they're going to stay keeping a close ear as to what the rumors are and what people believe and police believe might be involved in this case.
News Channel 7's Andrew Bartlane has been in Moscow all day for us. And how is the community reacting to obviously something that at this only a little more than 24 hours old at this point now, Andrew?
Well, the information we've been able to gather from Moscow police, and we also spoke with Moscow's mayor, they tell us that there's no immediate threat to people in and around this area. But then they also add there's no suspect that they have or anybody in custody. So,
do you think it's likely they know who the main target was and they're not sharing that?
I think it's very likely, Marnie. I think they would be judging that by the level of violence against that individual that would be more extreme than the other individuals.
Travis Serafin was named Eden Prairie Officer of the Year in 2011, but his name has now jeopardized the future of at least 35 cases in Hennepin County.
Well, it's devastating. I've been a prosecutor in Hennepin County for over 30 years. I've never seen anything like this.
Chief Deputy County Attorney David Brown says the trouble stems from a search warrant Detective Serafin obtained for a case involving this South Minneapolis apartment in 2017.
The officers found a large amount of heroin and some fentanyl in the house and a much smaller amount of drugs in a vehicle.
But Brown says Serafin did not get a search warrant for the car. Instead, he allegedly altered the original warrant for the home and then lied under oath, calling the discrepancy a clerical error.
The fair trial of a defendant depends upon the truthful testimony of the witnesses. That did not happen here.
And that will impact all of Serafin's cases opened or closed after the warrant was filed last September. 32 cases where he was a critical witness will be dismissed. In another 11 cases, he was a peripheral witness, and defense lawyers have been contacted.
We would not trust him as a witness for any further prosecution. I believe they are in the process of terminating him, but that is a question for Eden Prairie.
In a statement, Eden Prairie Police wouldn't comment on the active investigation, adding the department holds officers to extremely high ethical standards. The department also affords officers time for due process if their actions are called into question.
While there should have never been this kind of dishonesty, in the first place, everyone has done their best to repair the damage as soon as possible.
The McLeod County Attorney's Office is now investigating Detective Serafin and could bring criminal charges. Deputy Attorney Brown says they don't have any evidence that anything happened like this before, but he says if a defense lawyer finds something in a prior case, they will look into it. Carla?
All right. Thank you so much, Kent.
Knife sheath that was found at 1122 King Road, up on Maddie Mogan's bed beside the bodies of Maddie Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez. That knife sheath that was left behind with the trace DNA apparently sent out of state to a startup in order to process. Don't know if that means the lab in Idaho, the state lab, wasn't good enough, but that's where it went to identify. All I can think of is the defense attorney saying, wait, the state of Idaho you couldn't do the job of finding any DNA on that knife sheath? You had to send it, outsource it? Does that mean that's going to be litigated and fought and contested and diminished by a defense attorney at trial?
Absolutely, because again, defense attorneys look wherever they can find to find a potential of reasonable doubt. And when there is a test either that they have to do unique, they have to go out of state, they have to do it a second or third time, or it's inconclusive. Those are little items, little catchphrases that defense attorneys use to see if there's reasonable doubt there. Now, again, it's got to be taken in comparison to all the other evidence, but certainly a defense team has to be pretty happy that that test did not come back positive to Kohberger's DNA on it, for example. So yeah, it's something they're going to look at.
Not so serious.
I'm so sorry. We're past the point of having polite conversations, okay?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. But, yeah, we'll go let them know. And then make sure.
Just let them know I'm not going to stand out here and wait for them to come out and give them MIPs or anything like that.
But in the same term,
tell them not to leave with alcohol.
Yeah.
That's the first way you're going to get us. Don't do stupid shit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard somebody say, don't do stupid shit and the cops won't touch you.
Yeah.
Be smart. Don't be stupid. Don't draw attention to yourself. Right?
Yep. It's fun. Thank you.
Hey, so, finish dumping stuff. I'll tell. You already told her about noise?
Yep, already told her about noise.
Well, I'm not going to warn you guys for noise because you don't live here.
Yeah.
But I would probably strongly suggest that anyone else that's left here, if they don't live here, y'all should probably leave together.
I'll let them know.
Cool.
Thank you, guys.
Because if not, I'm going to come back. And I don't think you want to. You don't. I'm not saying you are.
We were just, they were here. They went to a party.
This would not be the first party I've ever gone to where the people who live here leave and just let people stay. Why they do that, I don't know. That to me, that would be stupid. I'm not going to let people stay where I live, and it's responsible. Oh, I know. Trust me. Like I said, I've done this for 22 years, man. I get it.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, we'll go let them know, and then make sure.
And just let them know I'm not going to stand out here and wait for them to come out and try and give them MIPs or anything like that. But in the same term, tell them not to leave with alcohol.
Yeah.
Because that's the first way you're going to get us to contact you.
Yeah.
Don't do stupid shit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard somebody say, don't do stupid shit and the cops won't touch you.
Yeah.
Be smart. Don't be stupid. Don't draw attention to yourself. Right?
Yep.
Cool.
People have a way of taking the invitation and using it as an excuse to get out of control and be loud.
Advantage.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I just hope for your sake that your friends don't put you in a position where you get the citation and you have to go to court to defend yourself from your friend's behavior.
When I got out and retired, it's a lot of apprehension because you're leaving a life that is so structured, it's so routine, and you know what kind of policies you have to follow, what kind of uniforms you have to wear, and a whole different speak. And so when you get out after 20 years of doing that, and you get into the society where, you know, they may not have the work ethic or the work values that you are accustomed to, it can be very frustrating. As well as being an armor officer, there's not many tanks out in the real world. So I was like, well, what the heck am I going to do? My skills are with, you know, armor tanks and that type of thing. So, you know, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, especially moving back to Minnesota. And in the area that we live right now, it has very small military bases and anything like that. So it's not like I could really go to work at a fort something and, you know, go to work as a contractor. So I had a lot of apprehensions when I got out of what I was going to do, where I would fit in, what kind of job I would get. And what I found out is that the skills that you bring out of the military, you know, the leadership skills, that the organizational skills, the commitment, the work ethic, and all of that is highly valuable in civilian life. But you have to also realize that civilian life is not military life. And so when you come in there and try to just go gangbusters on something, it doesn't always fly. So that was kind of hard getting used to at first, but as long as you can incorporate that, you know, you'll be all right. I mean, I remember some days where, you know, my guys would be working 24, 36, 48 hours straight when we were out in the fields. And, you know, if a tank went down, they worked till they fixed it. If it was 30 below zero, they were out there working and doing it. If it was 120 degrees, I was stationed in Fort Irwin, California for 3 years. You know, those guys were still out there working on the tanks, doing what they had to do to get the job done. And when you get into the civilian life, you know, you're kind of punching a clock in a lot of areas. Now, there are some jobs, of course, where you have that work ethic and the timelines and the suspenses, and that you have to get them done, and no matter what. But for the majority of the civilian life, you know, you come in at 8, you leave at 4:30, and most of the people are leaving. And I find that probably a lot of the military people are sitting there by themselves in their office finishing whatever needed to be done that day. So I did find that there was kind of sometimes in some professions a work ethic that was punch the clock 9 to 5 and, you know, you were gone. So that kind of, you have to kind of ease into that. And to tell you the truth, the first couple of years I was a workaholic, and especially working in the Pentagon, where you're working, you know, 12, 13 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week. To come back and only work 8 hours a day was different, to say the least. You know, when I was going home at 4:30, I'm like, gee, shouldn't I be working another 2 or 3 hours? So it takes some getting used to. So you can almost overextend yourself, I think, when you first get out and you have that commitment to the job that maybe not everybody else has.
A new theory surfaced this week in the case of the Idaho student murders that I find incredibly interesting. It's about probably the single most important piece of evidence in the case: a knife sheath discovered at the crime scene, which allegedly has suspect Brian Kohberger's DNA on it. The theory is one I just hadn't even considered, that might have been intentionally left there by Kohberger to throw off investigators. The knife sheath looked like this, both with USMC imprinted on it, along with the U.S. Marine Corps Eagle, Globe, and Anchor insignia. This theory comes from a number of people, but most recently from criminal profiler John Kelly. And it goes like this: that Kohberger left the sheath on purpose, and that the military references were no accident, that they were a ploy to send investigators on a hunt for someone else, someone in the military perhaps, someone other than Kohberger. To further this claim, Kelly calls this staging 101, perhaps a ruse learned from Kohberger's doctoral studies in criminal justice. Kelly claims a normal reaction for someone who had just used a knife would be to return it to its sheath. And the DNA found may have just been an oversight. It's a theory also suggested by British criminology professor David Wilson.
That seems to be a remarkably clumsy move.
Or a remarkably clever move. Because one of the things that's really struck me about the person that's been arrested and accused of this is he is intelligent and high functioning. So would a highly skilled, intelligent student who was teaching criminology, a PhD student, have made such a basic error?
Well, look, the guy was clearly not the brightest criminal. You know that. But according to the criminal affidavit, the tan leather knife sheath was discovered laying on the bed next to Madison Mogen's right side. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA left on the button snap. The knife itself is missing. And with Kohberger said to be an obsessive compulsive with other things like food, one imagines cleanliness in general, it's likely he hid the knife somewhere else after committing the murders, someplace where the blood wouldn't contaminate his clothes. They linked the knife to Kohberger through the DNA recovered from trash at his family's home in Pennsylvania. So let's talk this through with Jesse Weber, anchor and host on the Law and Crime Network, who has been closely following the story. Jesse, what do you make of the theory?
I think it makes no sense. All due respect, no sense. And I'll explain why. First of all, this K-Bar USMC knife, I can go on Amazon right now. I can go on kbar.com right now. I could buy it. This is not something that is exclusive to the military. And without any other evidence left there pointing to a member of the military, it makes no sense that he would think, or whoever the suspect is, that the police would immediately think military. And top of all this, the biggest point, I'm going to take the risk of leaving a piece of evidence that might have my DNA on it, and we all saw that it possibly does, with the idea of maybe the police are going to look at somebody else. It makes absolutely no sense. And if this really was the motivation, one of the dumbest things I've ever thought.
Well, yeah, and we know that he made other, mistakes. But the argument goes that he thought he had cleaned the sheath. He thought he had sort of left a pristine piece of evidence, but he missed the sort of the snap, right?
Something else. Some kind of something else.
No.
And I was thinking you're a good-looking man. You wouldn't need a shakedown to get some.
What about rough trade? Scary guys, girls talk.
Around here, they're rough. Or whiskey limp. Seen plenty of guys that get touchy, something sets them off, and they're like little boys. People always go away around here.
Where would I look? Working girls might know the blonde.
If she was gaming I-10 Southside, heard of this place. Kind of trailer park. Girls work, stay. Call it the ranch.
Where's that?
Like south of Spanish Lake, supposed to be. You know the place? What's your deal?
I don't have a deal.
I mean, what do you do? Never mind. I thought you were gonna bust me.
I told him, not interested.
Yeah, I know. Kind of strange. Like you might be dangerous.
Well, of course I'm dangerous. I'm police. I can do terrible things to people with impunity.
I'm curious, as we await this vigil on Wednesday, which will be happening statewide, but there will be a vigil on the campus of the University of Iowa. Would a killer stay close by? Would a killer show up to an event like that? And how do police and investigators prepare for that possibility?
I think in this situation, it is very likely and certainly possible that this killer would go to this vigil. I think this killer is a part of the community. They could be on break and staying their distance, but I believe they're part of this community and they're going to stay keeping a close ear as to what the rumors are and what people believe and police believe might be involved in this case.
Who do you think they're looking for? What kind of guy do you think they're looking for from what you've learned?
Well, I mean, basically, we're looking for generally somebody who is probably a white male who's in his 20s or 30s, somebody who's familiar with that area, somebody who has freedom of movement late at night, into the early hours of the morning, somebody who I believe either had some kind of relationship with one or more of those victims in that house, or he was stalking one or more of those victims in the house. But there is a relationship between him and that house. Because, frankly, this is an extremely high-risk crime. This is not something that just anybody could pull off, and he had to have some connection in order to get away with this.
When you say that this is high risk, why?
Well, it's somebody entering an occupied dwelling with 6 adults, any of whom could have had another knife, a gun, or a camera or a phone or a way to attack him. In other words, when you're planning a crime, and believe me, mass crimes, mass murders like this are typically planned. When you're planning a crime, you want to make sure that you have the highest probability of actually accomplishing it and getting away. And I think in order to do that, he had to know their schedules. He had to know that they were probably drunk or sound asleep by the time he came into that house.
It has been more than a week since 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in a home near campus, and police have not identified who killed them. 3 of the victims lived at the house where the attack occurred. The 4th was there visiting his girlfriend. Police believe they were targeted. With us now is retired agent and former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole. She's the director of George Mason University's Forensic Science Program. Mary Ellen, it's great to talk to you again, although sadly, tragically, we're always talking to you when something horrific has happened. So when you look at this story, Mary Ellen, what sticks out to you about this case and what investigators are looking for?
Well, there are a couple of things that really stand out to me. And I know investigators said that the victims were targeted, and that's a behavioral term that has a lot of meaning to me. So the question is, how are they making that determination? And were they all equally targeted? And the way that assessment has to be made is to see if any of the victims were treated differently in that crime scene. In other words, if one victim received more injuries or was treated differently after the stabbing occurred. And that usually tells you that that person could have been the focus of the attack. And then secondly, this offender had to leave a lot of evidence at that crime scene. He was not evidence conscious, and so there will be forensic evidence. For example, it's likely that the offender cut themselves with the knife. After you stab that many times, your hand goes down on the blade and you cut yourself and you leave blood there, and that's DNA evidence. And so that evidence is going to be extremely important. And then finally, just based on going inside somebody else's home in the middle of the night with other people there to commit a quadruple homicide suggests to me that that person has likely been in that home prior to this attack, and that this individual, this offender, has prior experience being in other people's homes.
So, Mary Ellen, I'm wondering about the time frame here. Are there any gaps in the timeline from when the victims were last seen and when they were found dead?
It does seem that there's some gaps and that information may not ever be able to be filled in because the victims themselves would be the ones to tell you, we got home at this time and then we went to bed at that time. So I don't know that that will ever be completed, but the question remains, at what point did the offender get inside that house? And were all the victims, they were in their beds is what it sounds like, but were they all asleep? If they were not all equally asleep in a deep sleep, that could also explain some of the defensive injuries on several of the victims, although that's not been clarified. So that timeline is getting narrower and narrower, but I'm not sure it will ever be pinned down 100%.
Mary Ellen, the murder weapon, what kind of murder weapon, what are you hearing about what could have been used? I just keep thinking that it's such a brutal attack to use an object to murder, 4 people. I'm trying to understand. It's just impossible to understand because doesn't it strike you, Mary Ellen, and you're the expert here, that this would be of an extreme personal nature to use a weapon like that, an object like that to murder 4 people, as opposed to a gun, which we've covered these mass shootings, and oftentimes The perpetrators don't know any of the victims, at least in the last couple of weeks, the ones that we've been reporting on. What does that tell you?
Well, when an offender uses a knife, they have to get close up and personal with the victim. And that means that they can see their face, they interact with them, especially if the victim is fighting back, and they see the victim slowly losing their life. Here's what I'd also say about this knife. It had to be a pretty sturdy knife because it survived the stabbing of 4 people multiple times. Now, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, they traditionally don't say, well, the weapon used here was exactly this. They can tell you elements of the instrument, but in my experience, they don't traditionally say it is exactly this, especially if you're dealing with a sharp-bladed instrument. But I'd also say that this offender, even though sloppy in the crime scene, leaving so much evidence, he was very efficient with this knife. He was able to complete 4 homicides and then leave the scene. That tells me this person has experience with that knife, a very effective cutting instrument, and that whether or not he would then or she would then throw that instrument away in the woods someplace is doubtful to me, because this is an instrument that's important to that offender. And I do think, based on the efficiency of those homicides, that the knife has been used before, not necessarily in another murder, but that the offender has used it before in other instances.
It's absolutely chilling, Mary Ellen, to hear you talk about that and efficiency when we're talking about the taking of human lives. I mean, based on what we know so far, what type of person or potentially group of people is most likely to commit an act like this?
Based on what I know so far, and again, that's coming from the media, this kind of violence is indicative of what we call instrumental violence, which is different from the traditional violence called reactive violence. Reactive violence is, if I punch you in the nose and you punch me back, that's reactive violence. But this instrumental violence is violence that is cold-blooded, it's predatory, and it's very callous type of violence perpetrated frequently on strangers. And this type of violence is oftentimes the kind of violence that we seek used by people that are psychopathic. The old-fashioned term was sociopath. But psychopathic individuals, not mentally ill, so I want to make that clear right away, but they are people who are profoundly lacking in empathy and guilt for their behavior. And when they do commit crimes, their crimes have a very high-risk element to it because they enjoy the thrill of whatever the crime is. If it's killing people, they enjoy having it be even more high risk than it needs to be. And this was a very high-risk crime. When you go into somebody's home in the middle of the night and kill them, that's very high risk.
Do you believe that there's a threat to the community?
I do. Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why I think that. If somebody has the capability of doing this, these wounds going into that home, these injuries, these wounds were not an effort to scare the victims or to threaten the victims. They were intended to kill the victims. And if an offender has this capability, even though maybe 1 or 2 of the victims were targeted and the others were not, but were still killed, this offender, because of that behavior, that high-risk impulsive type of behavior, is capable of repeating it again in the right set of circumstances. So based on that, I would say that this is he or she or they are at high risk for reoffending.
So deeply disturbing to hear your assessment, but important, right, in the absence of any additional public information at this point as people try to understand what happened there. Mary Ellen O'Toole, Mary Ellen, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, speaking of speculations, you know, you live in the neighborhood, which means there was somebody that, you know, did this. Do you speculate without naming names? We don't want to name any names or anything or identify people on our channel, but do you ever speculate about who could have possibly done this?
I mean, for sure, but no one fits the bill. Honestly, when I think about all my neighbors, I'm just like, no way. Like everyone, I think, even like, you know, who might have killed them at the slightest inconvenience, it's just completely irrational and ridiculous. Like when I think about any like individual personally, like any personal like neighbor, like anyone in this area, I'm just like, there's no way. Like they're all like pretty normal people. They all got their own shit going on. To think of them doing this is just absurd. But
so with
yeah.
that being said, what none of your neighbors fit the bill. What type of person do you think this might have been? What it was?
I'm looking into I don't know if it's true, but I was looking into a report that said it was like almost a blunt, heavy object, and a really strong person did it. I'm kind of imagining like maybe like a hunter dude, like some like super mentally ill dude who's maybe experienced with hunting, who has like some type of like farm blunt stabbing object, and just like really waited patiently until everything was really quiet. Like maybe he knew about this weekend was being quiet,